Hello, fellow birders. My name is Denis Kania. Today we're going to be taking a closer look at the swans that can be seen in DuPage County. On the DuPage Birding Club Education channel, we'll be discussing all things bird related. And as I mentioned, today we'll be taking a closer look at the swans that can be seen in DuPage County. So here are the three swan species that we do see in DuPage County. We have the Tundra Swan, Trumpeter Swan, and Mute Swan. And Mute Swan will generally stand out pretty well just because of that bright bill color. The other two can be very difficult to separate, and so we'll be taking a closer look at those two in particular. So here is a series of charts that show the records for all three species that has been compiled over the last 33 years of bird survey work at Fermilab. You can see that we've had mute swans through all of the survey periods, and you can see that they do show up throughout the year. So it is a breeding species on occasion in DuPage County. As long as there is open ice, open water in the cold months, we can have records. And fortunately at Fermilab, there is open water through most of the winter. But we expect that by sometime in February and through the rest of the spring, that's when the vast majority of our records from Mute Swan are going to show up. And they do return in the fall, although it seems they're more sporadic at that time. Trumpeter Swan does not breed in the county, so we have a big gap during the breeding season. And they've really come on the scene only in the last two survey periods. Their numbers are increasing throughout the country, and so we are starting to get more of them showing up. You can see again that we do have some records that are occurring in January. Again, if there's open water, we'll have the birds showing up. But for the most part, we would expect them to be showing up as a migrant, and most of that migration is probably going to be taking place in March, and then again, probably in late November and maybe into December a little bit. It would be very compatible or comparable to the migration patterns that we see with Tundra Swan, which has been around through all of the survey periods. You can see the majority of our records are coming from March in the springtime, and majority of fall records are in November, going into December a bit. And again, if we do have open water, there's the potential for these birds to be around even in the coldest of the winter months in January and February. So here's that swan that will stand out. It's the Mute Swan, and one of the main reasons that it does stand out is that it does have this very bright orangish bill, and that's as an adult. And you can see it does have this knob that grows on the base of the bill. Even when that knob is not there, we have some juvenile birds represented here in a dark plumage. You can see that the bill color is not that orange color that we see in the adult, but you can still see that the profile of the head is quite different. And in this particular case, you can even see that the knob is starting to develop. This bird here is not showing that knob, but again, the profile of the head is different than what we're going to see on the other two species. So what I have represented here are juveniles that are in a dark plumage. They also appear in a white plumage, but as far as the structure of the head and that bill structure, there wouldn't be any difference. So here are the troublesome swans that we will have to deal with. And this picture shows actually a trumpeter swan here in the front and a tundra swan in the back. And the trumpeter is a larger swan, but you seldom see them together, so it's difficult to make that comparison. So we're going to have to look at some very, very specific details in the structure of the head and the bill, and also some bill color. So here's our tundra swan. And the first thing that you might notice, if you'd be lucky to have one that does have some yellow in the base of the bill. And if we do see that yellow, that immediately eliminates trumpeter swan. So then our distinguishing between the two would become an easy matter. But we do end up seeing tundra swans that aren't going to show any of that yellow in the bill. So then that creates the problem. So the next thing that we would want to look for is where the forecrown meets the top of the bill. And we want to be able to see that as best as we can from a head-on facing position so that we can see just the shape of that. And in the case of Tundra Swan, that should be a rounded edge. Another thing that we can look for on the face would be to look at this line here that is created by the bill and the face. And on Tundra Swan, we'll see that this portion of the bill right here, just above the gape, will be concave. So that's very important to get those lines as best you can, because that's going to be very defining, especially if you don't have that yellow. So again, looking head on so that you can see whether this edge here is rounded, and then also seeing how concave it is in this section right here. Those are both very important to see, because then when we compare that to our Trumpeter Swan, here we do have a nice photo that shows directly head on. And you can see that it comes to a very sharp point where the top of the bill is meeting the forecrown. It's almost like a widow's peak here. And so that's quite different than what we would see on the Tundra Swan. If we saw this directly head on that Tundra Swan, you would see that it's very rounded here. And then again, also looking at this edge here, just above the gape, you can see that it's rather straight. It's not anywhere near as concave as what we just saw on that Tundra Swan. And of course, there is no yellow here in the bill, so that would be a defining feature usually for Trumpeter Swan. We just have to worry that some of our tundras may not have that yellow. So features to remember, it's very important to get that bill color, and the shape is also very important. So on a Mute Swan, most often you'll see that it has this orangish pinkish coloring on the bill, and it does develop a knob as an adult at the top of the base of the bill. But even the juvenile birds are going to show some kind of a different face profile that it would differ definitely from the Tundra and the Trumpeter Swans. It seems to have a steeper forehead, and then in some cases we'll be developing that knob already. So Tundra Swan quite often will show some yellow at the base of the bill, but not always. And Trumpeter Swans will always have a black bill, entirely black. So when we do see these birds that have the black bill, it's important to get a good look at how the top of the bill is meeting the forecrown to see whether it's pointed or rounded. And then it's also very important to see how the edge of the bill just above the gape, how that is drawn, whether it's more or less straight or if you have kind of a concave edge to that area. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. Hopefully we have given you some bird food for thought. And I hope you'll join us again in the future as we explore all things bird related.